The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of Timber Creek's dusty Main Street, kicking up a cloud that momentarily obscured Penelope Barrett's first glimpse of her new home. At 32 years of age, most considered her long-past marriageable prime, but desperation had a way of making even the wildest dreams seem reasonable. After answering an advertisement in the Eastern newspaper, she had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle rancher named Owen Dawson, who needed a wife, but hadn't specified he wanted a young one. Clutching her worn leather valise, Penelope descended from the coach with as much dignity as her travel-weary body could muster. The small Montana town of Timber Creek looked exactly as she'd imagined a Western settlement in 1875 would. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts reaching toward the sky like children trying to appear taller. The majestic mountains in the distance seemed to cradle the town, making it appear even smaller than it was. "Madam, you need help with them bags?" the coach driver asked, already unloading her trunk. "Thank you kindly," Penelope replied, smoothing her travel-wrinkled skirts. Her blue dress had been fashionable 5 years ago in Boston, but here it felt overdone, like she was trying too hard to impress. Her chestnut hair, once her pride, now showed threads of silver at the temples that she'd given up trying to hide. "You must be the mail-order bride," said a young woman who approached from the general store. She couldn't have been more than 20, with golden curls and a pink-cheeked face untouched by worry. "Mr. Dawson said to expect you today." "Yes, I'm Penelope Barrett." She extended her hand, trying to ignore the woman's obvious surprise as she took in Penelope's appearance. "I'm Sadie Miller. My pa owns the general store." Sadie's eyes widened slightly. "Forgive me for saying so, but you're not what we expected." Heat crept into Penelope's cheeks. "And what did you expect, Miss Miller?" The girl had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, most mail-order brides are. Younger, I suppose. Mr. Dawson is only 35, I see." Penelope swallowed hard. She'd been honest in her letters about her age, but perhaps Mr. Dawson hadn't shared that information with the townsfolk. Or worse, perhaps he hadn't paid attention to that detail himself. "Mr. Dawson asked me to tell you he's been held up at his ranch with a sick cow but will be in town by supper time," Sadie continued. "You can wait at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson is expecting you." As they walked toward the boarding house, Penelope felt eyes on her from every porch and window. Whispers followed in their wake. "That's her. Thought she'd be younger. Poor Owen. Guess beggars can't be choosers." Each comment was a needle prick to her already fragile confidence. When she'd left Boston, fleeing a life of dwindling prospects as her parents' unpaid caretaker until their deaths left her nearly penniless, she'd known this was a risk. Still, Owen Dawson's letters had been kind, practical, and seemingly unbothered by her stated age. He'd written that he needed a sensible partner, not a debutante playing at marriage. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with iron-gray hair, greeted Penelope at the boarding house door. "Welcome to Timber Creek, Miss Barrett. Your room is ready." Her eyes, like everyone else's, traveled over Penelope with barely concealed surprise. "Thank you," Penelope replied. "I understand Mr. Dawson will arrive this evening." "That's what I hear," Mrs. Henderson said, "though if I were you, I wouldn't count those chickens yet." Penelope's stomach clenched. "Whatever do you mean?" Mrs. Henderson sighed. "Owen Dawson is a good man, one of the finest in these parts, but he's also particular. Word around town is he was expecting someone different." "I was perfectly honest in my correspondence," Penelope said stiffly. "I'm sure you were, dear, but men sometimes hear what they want to hear." Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. "Rest now. Whatever happens, happens." In her small room, Penelope unpacked her few belongings and then stood before the spotted mirror. The face that looked back was one she knew well: high cheekbones, large brown eyes that had once been called expressive, and a mouth that curved naturally upward at the corners. Not beautiful, perhaps, but not the wizened crone the townspeople seemed to expect. Still, the years and hardships had left their mark: fine lines around her eyes. a certain weariness in her expression. As evening approached, Penelope changed into her best dress, a deep green that complemented her eyes, and pinned her hair in a simple but flattering style. She would face Owen Dawson with dignity, regardless of his reaction. The boarding house dining room hummed with conversation when Penelope entered, but a hush fell as heads turned toward her. She squared her shoulders and took the empty seat Mrs. Henderson indicated. "Evening, folks," she said, proud that her voice didn't waver. The conversations resumed, albeit more quietly. Penelope was serving herself from a platter of roast beef when the front door opened. The room fell silent again. A tall man stood in the doorway, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of eyes that were the startling blue of a summer sky. He wore simple clothes, a checked shirt, practical trousers, and dusty boots, but carried himself with quiet confidence. Mrs. Henderson bustled forward. "Owen, right on time, your guest has arrived." Owen Dawson's eyes found Penelope immediately. She couldn't read his expression as he crossed the room, but she braced herself for disappointment or worse, rejection. "Miss Barrett," he said, extending his hand. His voice was deep and pleasant with a slight drawl. "I apologize for not meeting your coach. One of my best heifers took sick." "I understand, Mr. Dawson," she replied, placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused. "I hope the animal recovered." A smile creased his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "She did, thanks for asking. May I join you?" "Please do." As he sat, Penelope was acutely aware of the other diners watching them, no doubt waiting for Owen to express shock or dismay at her age. Instead, he filled his plate and began to eat, occasionally asking polite questions about her journey. When the pie was served, Mrs. Henderson couldn't contain herself any longer. "So, Owen, is Miss Barrett what you expected?" The table fell silent. Penelope braced herself, staring down at her barely touched dessert. "Mrs. Henderson," Owen replied calmly, "I expected an intelligent, honest woman who wouldn't mind the hardships of ranch life. From our correspondence and this brief meeting, Miss Barrett seems to be exactly that. But surely you didn't expect." Mrs. Henderson gestured vaguely toward Penelope. "Didn't expect what?" Owen's voice had an edge now, someone so. The woman hesitated, mature. "I'm 32, Mrs. Henderson," Penelope said quietly, hardly ancient. "And I'm 35, Owen added. "I wasn't looking for a child bride." A man at the next table snorted. "Come on, Dawson. Every man wants a young, pretty wife. You must be disappointed." Penelope felt her face flame with humiliation. She'd faced disdain before, but never so publicly. Owen set down his fork with deliberate care. "I find it interesting, Joe Wheeler, that you think you know what I want better than I do." His voice was dangerously soft. "Miss Barrett was forthright about her age in her letters, which is more than I can say for your business dealings." Wheeler's face darkened. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Owen interrupted. "Miss Barrett traveled thousands of miles to meet a stranger based on nothing but written words and hope. That takes more courage than most men in this room have shown. She deserves respect." He turned to Penelope, whose heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Miss Barrett, would you care to take a walk? The evening's pleasant, and I think we have matters to discuss that don't require an audience." Penelope nodded, not trusting her voice. As Owen helped her from her chair, she could feel the stares burning into her back. Outside, the evening air was cooling rapidly, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Owen offered his arm and Penelope took it, finding solid strength in his forearm. "I must apologize for the reception you've received," he said as they strolled toward the edge of town. "Small towns breed small minds sometimes. You've nothing to apologize for, Mr. Dawson. You defended me quite admirably." "Owen, please." He glanced down at her. "And it was the least I could do. Those people had no right to make such judgments." They walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant piano from the saloon. "I should be honest with you," Penelope finally said. If you wish to withdraw your proposal, I would understand. I can find work somewhere and repay you for the coach fare. Owen stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his expression was serious but not unkind. Is that what you want, to withdraw? No, she admitted. But I don't want your pity either. Pity? He looked genuinely puzzled. Why would I pity you? Because I'm not young and beautiful like the other women who come west as brides. Owen studied her for a long moment. Miss Barrett, Penelope, I've spent 15 years building my ranch from nothing. I've survived blizzards, drought, rustlers, and more stubborn cattle than I care to count. What I need is a partner who understands hard work and commitment, not someone who'll wilt at the first hardship. He gestured toward the town behind them. Those people back there, they think youth and conventional beauty are all that matter. But I've seen pretty faces hide ugly souls, and I've watched young brides break under the reality of frontier life. Owen took a deep breath. In your letters, you were practical, intelligent, and honest. You wrote about wanting purpose, not just security. You asked questions about the ranch, the animals, the work involved. Not once did you ask if the house was pretty or if there were dances to attend. Those things seemed irrelevant, Penelope said. Exactly. His smile returned, warmer this time. To me, qualities like wisdom, kindness, and strength become more beautiful with time, not less. I don't see your age as a flaw, Penelope. I see it as proof you've endured and grown. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her with such genuine appreciation. The proposal stands, Owen continued softly. I still want to marry you if you'll have me, but I suggest we take a few days for you to see the ranch, meet my neighbors, and decide if this life is truly what you want. Marriage is too important for either of us to rush into without certainty. Penelope nodded, overcome with emotion. That seems wise. Then it's settled. I've rooms ready at the ranch, and my neighbor Mrs. Callahan has agreed to stay as chaperone until the wedding, if there is to be one. Thank you, Penelope whispered, for your kindness and your respect. Both are freely given and well-deserved. Owen offered his arm again. Shall we return? We have an early start tomorrow. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Penelope felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Fragile but real, blooming in her heart like a desert flower after rain. Morning came early, the eastern sky barely tinged with pink when Owen arrived with a wagon for Penelope's trunk. The air was crisp, promising another hot day ahead. Mrs. Henderson provided them with biscuits and coffee for the journey, her manner noticeably more respectful than the previous evening. It's about 2 hours to the ranch, Owen explained as he helped Penelope onto the wagon seat. Not too far, but the road gets rough in places. Penelope settled her skirts around her. I'm no stranger to discomfort, Mr. Dawson. Owen, he reminded her with a smile. Owen, she echoed, the name feeling both foreign and right on her tongue. As they left town behind, the landscape opened up before them, rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains sharp against the brightening sky. The vastness of it stole Penelope's breath. It's beautiful, she murmured. It is, Owen agreed. Different from the East, I imagine. Very different. In Boston, one is always surrounded by buildings and people. Here the land feels infinite. That's what captured me when I first came west, all this space, all this possibility. He clicked to the horses, urging them up a gentle slope. Course, that same vastness can turn deadly in winter. Blizzards, wolves, temperatures that freeze a man solid if he's caught outside. You're trying to scare me, Penelope observed, but with good humor, Owen chuckled. Just being honest about the challenges. Ranch life isn't easy, especially for women. No nearby neighbors for company, endless work, and comforts are few. I didn't come west seeking comfort, she replied. After my parents died, I had few options in Boston. I could continue as a companion to wealthy elderly ladies, living on their charity, or I could find work in a factory. Neither prospect appealed. And marriage to a local man wasn't possible, Penelope hesitated. I was considered, past my prime. The men my age sought younger women, and widowers with children wanted someone who could still bear many more. Owen's hands tightened slightly on the reins. And you believe you cannot? I don't know, she admitted. I've never been married, never tried to have children. The doctors in Boston suggested it might be difficult at my age, but not impossible. Does that concern you, the possibility of not having children? Of course it does. What woman doesn't dream of being a mother? She sighed. But I've made peace with the idea that it might not happen for me. I hoped that wouldn't be a disappointment to you. Owen was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. I won't lie and say I haven't thought about having a family, but it's not the only reason I sought a wife. He glanced at her. If we're blessed with children, I'd be grateful. If not, we'd still build a good life together. His words eased a knot of anxiety that had been lodged in Penelope's chest since she'd decided to come west. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels the only sounds. Tell me about your ranch, Penelope prompted eventually. Owen's face lit up. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land with reliable water. I run about 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. Got a decent-sized garden plot, some chickens, pigs, a few goats for milk. You manage all that alone? I have 2 ranch hands brothers, Miguel and Tomas Vasquez. Good men, hard workers. They live in a cabin near the main house. He pointed to the east. And about 5 miles that way is the Callahan place. Sarah Callahan's husband died 2 years back. She runs her small ranch with her son Patrick, who's 16 now. The woman who's to be my chaperone. Yes, Sarah's a fine woman, practical but kind. I think you'll like her. They crested a hill and Owen reined in the horses. There it is, Dawson Ranch. Below them stretched a valley cradled by gentle slopes. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, and near its banks stood a cluster of buildings. The main house was larger than Penelope had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of logs with a proper shingled roof. Nearby stood a barn, corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. Fields of what looked like hay or wheat spread to the east, while cattle dotted the grasslands to the west. You built all this? Penelope asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Started with just the small cabin that's now the bunkhouse, Owen said, pride evident in his tone. Added to it year by year. The main house I finished just last summer. As they approached, Penelope could see the care that had gone into the ranch's construction. The house had a wide porch with rocking chairs, the barn was well maintained, and the garden beside the house was thriving with vegetables. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and laugh lines around her mouth. Right on time, she called. I've got coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. Owen helped Penelope down from the wagon. Sarah Callahan, this is Penelope Barrett. Penelope, Sarah's been kind enough to ready the house and stay until we've made our decisions. Sarah's handshake was firm and warm. Welcome to Montana, Miss Barrett. It's good to have another woman nearby, regardless of how things work out. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Callahan. Sarah, please. Formality doesn't survive long out here. As they entered the house, Penelope was struck by how comfortable it felt. The main room served as both parlor and dining area with a large stone fireplace at one end. The furniture was simple but well made, a sturdy table with chairs, a sofa covered in what looked like homespun fabric, bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised her with their variety. You have quite a library, she remarked. Owen looked pleased. Books are my one indulgence. When the snow piles up and travel's impossible, reading keeps the mind sharp. Owen's being modest, Sarah interjected. He's the most educated man in the county, studied at Yale before coming west. Penelope couldn't hide her surprise. Yale, but why would you leave that life for this? A shadow crossed Owen's face. Family expectations and personal desires don't always align. My father wanted me to follow him into law. I wanted open skies. He gestured around the room. I think I made the right choice. After coffee and biscuits, Owen showed Penelope to her room upstairs. It was simply furnished with a bed, washstand, and chest of drawers, but clean and welcoming. A window overlooked the valley, offering a view that no Boston mansion could match. "I'll leave you to settle in," Owen said. "I need to check on the herd. Sarah will show you around the house, and tomorrow I can give you a proper tour of the ranch if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." After Owen left, Sarah helped Penelope unpack. The older woman was warm but direct, answering questions honestly and offering information Penelope hadn't thought to ask. "Winter's the hardest," Sarah explained as they hung dresses in the small wardrobe. "Sometimes the snow piles so high you can't open the door and you might not see another soul for weeks except those living with you." "That sounds challenging," Sarah nodded. "It is. Drove my sister-in-law back east after just one season, said she couldn't bear the isolation." She studied Penelope. "You don't strike me as someone who needs constant company, though." "I've spent most of my adult life caring for invalid parents," Penelope replied. "Solitude sometimes felt like a luxury." "Good. That'll serve you well here." Sarah smoothed a wrinkle from a folded shawl. "Owen's a good man, Miss Barrett. The best I've known besides my late husband. He works hard, deals fairly, and has never raised his voice to man or beast that didn't deserve it. You speak highly of him." "I speak truthfully." Sarah met her eyes directly. "Half the unmarried women in the territory have set their caps for him over the years. Young ones, pretty ones, rich ones, he never showed interest. And yet he advertised for a wife. A practical decision for a practical man." Sarah closed the wardrobe. "Owen needs a partner, not an ornament. From what I can see, he chose wisely." That night at supper, Penelope met Miguel and Tomas Vasquez, brothers who had worked for Owen for 5 years. They were respectful, addressing her as Miss Barrett and speaking English despite their obvious greater comfort with Spanish. The meal was simple but delicious: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that Sarah had baked. Conversation flowed easily, with Owen asking about cattle prices in the East, Tomas telling a humorous story about a stubborn mule, and Sarah offering practical advice about managing the garden through Montana's short growing season. "You enjoy gardening, Miss Barrett?" Miguel asked. "I've never had the opportunity for more than a window box of herbs," Penelope admitted, "but I've always wanted to try." "The soil here is good," Owen said. "Next year we could expand the garden if you'd like." Next year. The words hung in the air, a reminder that no decisions had been made yet. After supper, while Sarah and the Vasquez brothers cleaned up, Owen invited Penelope to join him on the porch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant pine. They sat in the rocking chairs, watching as the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "It's so quiet," Penelope murmured. "In Boston, there was always noise: carriages, vendors, neighbors." "The quiet bothers some folks," Owen said. "Makes them feel small." "I find it peaceful." She gazed at the darkening landscape. "Though I imagine it might seem less so in winter. Winter has its own music: the wind in the eaves, the crack of ice on the creek, the soft hush of falling snow." Owen's voice was thoughtful. "Each season here speaks differently if you learn to listen." They rocked in companionable silence as stars began to appear, brilliant against the deepening blue. "May I ask you something personal?" Penelope ventured after a while. "Of course. Why did you never marry before now?" "Sarah mentioned that you had opportunities." Owen considered her question, his rocking chair creaking gently. "I came west with nothing but determination and book learning that proved mostly useless for ranch work. The first years were about survival, not courtship. By the time I'd built something worth sharing, I'd grown. Particular, I suppose." "Particular how?" "I watched friends marry in haste, lonely men grabbing at any chance for companionship. Those marriages often ended in misery or abandonment." He sighed. "I decided I'd rather be alone than badly matched. But now I have a ranch that needs more than I alone can give it, and I find myself wanting someone to share both the burden and the joy of this place." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "Your letters spoke of strength and purpose. They made me think perhaps we might fit together well." Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I hope we might." The next day dawned clear and bright. After breakfast, Owen saddled 2 horses for their tour of the ranch. Penelope had mentioned she could ride, though it had been years since she'd had the opportunity. "This is Daisy," Owen said, introducing Penelope to a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "She's got good manners and an easy gait." Penelope approached the horse cautiously. "Hello, Daisy." She stroked the mare's velvety nose, gaining confidence when the horse nickered softly. Owen helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Penelope was grateful for the split riding skirt she'd purchased in Boston, anticipating such occasions. It was practical if not entirely fashionable. "You sit well," Owen observed as she settled into the saddle. "When was the last time you rode?" "About 10 years ago, when my father still owned a small property outside Boston." She gathered the reins, muscle memory returning. Before his investments failed. Owen mounted his own horse, a tall bay gelding. "We'll take it slow. If you need to rest, just say so." They rode first to the creek that provided water for the ranch, following its course through meadows bright with wildflowers. Owen pointed out landmarks, explained his grazing rotation for the cattle, and showed her the hay fields that would provide winter feed. "The growing season's short here," he explained, "but intense. We have to make the most of every day from spring thaw to first frost." At midday, they stopped in a grove of cottonwoods by the creek. Owen spread a blanket and unpacked a lunch that Sarah had prepared: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. Penelope sank gratefully onto the blanket, her muscles protesting the unaccustomed exercise. "Are you sore?" Owen asked, noticing her wince. "A bit," she admitted. "But it's a good sort of sore. I've been too sedentary these past years." "Ranch life will cure that," he chuckled, handing her a canteen of cool water. As they ate, Penelope found herself studying Owen when he wasn't looking directly at her. His profile was strong, his hands capable and sure in every movement. Unlike many men she'd known in Boston, he listened when she spoke, considering her words rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. "What made you answer my advertisement?" he asked suddenly. There must have been safer options than traveling thousands of miles to marry a stranger. Penelope considered the question. "Safety wasn't what I needed," she finally said. "After my parents died, I realized I'd spent my life waiting for them to recover, waiting for my real life to begin. But at 32, with no fortune and no family connections, my options in Boston were limited to dependence on others' charity or barely surviving on a seamstress's wages." She looked out over the creek, its waters catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. "Your advertisement spoke of building something together. It offered purpose, not just security. That appealed to me more than you can know. And now that you've seen some of the reality, does it still appeal?" "Even more so," she answered honestly. "This land has a power to it. I can see why you love it." Owen's expression softened. "Most people only see the hardships, the isolation, the weather, the endless work. They miss the beauty, the freedom." "I see both," Penelope said. "And I'm not afraid of hard work or solitude." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. They continued their tour after lunch, riding to higher ground where Owen showed her the boundaries of his property and pointed out neighboring ranches, including the distant roof of Sarah Callahan's house. "The Dawson Ranch isn't the biggest in the territory," he said, "but it's good land with reliable water even in drought years. I've been offered good money for it several times." "But you wouldn't sell." "This land is part of me now," he replied simply. "I've poured too much of myself into it to let it go." By the time they returned to the house, the sun was low in the west and Penelope's muscles were protesting loudly. Owen helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "You did well today," he said. "Many Eastern women would have complained after the first hour. I may complain tomorrow when I can't move." she admitted with a smile. That evening, after another pleasant supper, Sarah announced she needed to return to her own ranch the next morning. Patrick's managing fine, but there's only so long a boy should be left to his own devices, she explained. Besides, I think you two don't need a chaperone to continue your conversations. Penelope felt a flutter of anxiety. But propriety can be observed without my constant presence, Sarah finished firmly. I'll come by every few days to check on things, and the Vasquez brothers are always nearby. No one who matters will question your reputation. Later, alone in her room, Penelope stood by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. 3 days ago, she'd been terrified that Owen would reject her outright upon seeing her. Now, she found herself hoping fervently that he wouldn't change his mind. There was a soft knock at her door. "Penelope, may I speak with you a moment?" Her heart leapt at Owen's voice. "Of course." She opened the door, conscious of her loosened hair and simple nightgown covered by a modest robe. Owen stood in the hallway, respectfully not entering her room. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with Sarah leaving. If you'd prefer another chaperone, I can arrange it." "It's not conventional, but then, none of this is," Penelope replied. "I trust you, Owen. I don't believe you would take advantage." His eyes, so blue even in the dim lamplight, held hers. "No, I wouldn't, but I care about your reputation and comfort. I appreciate that." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Have you reached any conclusions about our arrangement?" Owen smiled, the expression warming his entire face. "I have some thoughts, but I'd like to give you more time to be certain of yours. Marriage is forever, Penelope. I won't rush you into a decision you might regret." His consideration touched her deeply. "Thank you. Sleep well," he said softly. "Tomorrow we can discuss what tasks around the ranch might interest you if you'd like to try your hand at some of them." "I'd like that very much." After he left, Penelope returned to the window, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Something was growing between them, something more than mere compatibility or practical partnership. Whether it was friendship or something deeper, she couldn't yet say, but for the first time in years, she felt alive with possibility. The next morning, Sarah departed after breakfast, leaving Penelope and Owen to establish their own routine. To Penelope's surprise, Owen suggested she accompany him on his morning rounds. "I thought you might like to see more of the daily workings," he explained as they walked toward the barn. "Unless you'd prefer to stay with the household tasks." "I'd much rather see everything," she replied eagerly, "though I fear I'll be more hindrance than help at first. Everyone starts somewhere." He handed her a pair of gloves. "These were Sarah's, but she left them for you." Ranch work is hard on hands unused to it. The morning passed in a whirlwind of new experiences. Owen showed her how to check the chicken coops for eggs, explained the feeding schedules for different animals, and demonstrated how to tell if a fence needed repair. Though much of it was unfamiliar, Penelope found herself absorbing the information eagerly, asking questions and even offering suggestions that Owen considered with genuine interest. "You have a practical mind," he observed as they walked back toward the house for the midday meal. "Most city folks get caught up in how things should be rather than working with what is." "My father was impractical enough for our entire family," Penelope replied. "Someone had to consider the realities." In the afternoon, Owen needed to ride out to check on a section of fencing with Miguel, so Penelope asked to try her hand at bread making. Sarah had left detailed instructions, and though her first attempt was far from perfect, the yeasty smell that filled the kitchen gave her a profound sense of satisfaction. When Owen returned, she proudly presented the slightly lopsided loaf. "My first effort," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I fear it's not up to Sarah's standards." Owen broke off a piece, still warm from the oven, and tasted it. "It's good," he declared. "Honest bread made with care, that's all that matters out here." His approval warmed her more than she expected. They ate the bread with soup Penelope had also prepared, and if the meal was simpler than what Sarah had provided, neither of them mentioned it. That evening, Owen brought out a checkerboard. "Do you play?" My father taught me, Penelope said. Though I warn you, I'm rather good. Owen's eyes twinkled. Is that a challenge, Miss Barrett? Perhaps it is, Mr. Dawson. They played for hours, each winning games in turn, their competitive spirits well matched. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and hopes they harbored. Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn to Owen's dry wit and thoughtful observations. When the grandfather clock in the corner struck 10, Penelope reluctantly rose. I should retire. Morning comes early on a ranch, as I'm learning. Indeed it does. Owen stood as well, suddenly looking uncertain. Penelope, I've enjoyed today immensely, as have I. Her voice was soft. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I thought we might ride to the north pasture. There's a spot there I'd like to show you. He hesitated. And perhaps we could discuss our arrangement more specifically? Penelope's heart quickened. I'd like that. He walked her to the foot of the stairs where they paused, the moment laden with unspoken thoughts. Good night, Owen. Good night, Penelope. Sleep well. As she climbed the stairs, Penelope felt his eyes following her, and the sensation was not unwelcome. The next morning dawned clear, but with a hint of clouds building to the west. After breakfast, they saddled the horses and rode north, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. Penelope found the riding easier today, her body remembering old skills and adjusting to new demands. The cattle are doing well this year, Owen commented as they passed a group of grazing Herefords. The grass is plentiful, and we've had no trouble with predators. How many calves were born this spring? Penelope asked, genuinely interested. 87, and we only lost 2. A good ratio. Pride colored his voice. In a few years, if prices hold, we might be able to expand the herd further. They rode for almost an hour before Owen led them off the main trail, following a smaller path that climbed steadily upward. The trees thinned, giving way to a meadow carpeted with wildflowers, purple lupine, golden blanket flower, and scarlet Indian paintbrush, creating a natural tapestry. At the meadow's edge, Owen dismounted and helped Penelope down. We'll walk from here, it's just over this rise. He took her hand casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and led her up a gentle slope. At the top, Penelope gasped. Before them stretched a view that seemed to encompass half of Montana rolling grasslands, forests of dark pine, and the distant mountains sharp against the sky. A small lake nestled in the valley below, its surface reflecting the clouds above. It's breathtaking, she whispered. This is the highest point of Dawson Ranch, Owen said, his voice quiet with reverence. I come here sometimes when decisions weigh heavy or when I need to remember why I chose this life. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze playing with Penelope's hair and tugging at Owen's hat. I found this spot my first year here, he continued. I was exhausted, half-starved, and questioning every choice I'd made, but standing here seeing all this. He gestured to the panorama before them. I knew I was where I belonged. Penelope looked at him, struck by the passion in his voice. It must have been terribly hard those first years. Harder than I ever imagined, he admitted. There were days I thought I wouldn't survive and nights I wasn't sure I wanted to, but something kept pushing me forward, stubbornness maybe, or simply the unwillingness to admit defeat. And now I can't imagine any other life. He turned to face her fully. Penelope, I brought you here for a reason. Her heart skipped. Yes. When I wrote that advertisement, I thought I was seeking a practical partnership, someone to share the work, perhaps bear children, make this house a proper home. His eyes held hers. But in these few days with you, I've realized I want more than that. Penelope scarcely dared breathe. What do you want, Owen? A true marriage, not just of convenience, but of minds and hearts. He took both her hands in his. I know it's fast, impossibly fast by Eastern standards, but out here life moves differently. We see clearly what matters. And what matters? Her voice was barely audible over the whispering grass, finding someone who faces life honestly, someone with strength and grace and wisdom. His thumbs traced small circles on her palms. Someone like you, Penelope. Tears pricked at her eyes. The town, what they said about my age, means nothing to me, he interrupted firmly. When I look at you, I don't see a number. I see a woman of substance, of character. I see someone who could be my true partner in all things. He released one of her hands to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. In my eyes, Penelope, you're timeless. Age is just a count of years, not a measure of worth or beauty. A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. No one has ever seen me that way before. Then they were blind. His voice was tender but certain. I'm asking you to be my wife, Penelope Barrett. Not because I need a housekeeper or because I'm lonely, but because in these few days, I've begun to see a future with you that outshines any I could imagine alone. Penelope closed her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions too powerful to contain. When she opened them again, she found the courage to speak her heart. I came west seeking security and purpose, she said softly. I never dared hope for understanding or love. And now? His question hung between them, weighted with hope. Now I find myself wanting all of those things, with you, she smiled through her tears. Yes, Owen Dawson, I will marry you. His answering smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but it kindled a warmth that spread through Penelope's entire being. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For being brave enough to come west, for seeing the beauty in this hard land, for choosing me. They stood there, wrapped in the moment and each other, until the distant rumble of thunder reminded them of the approaching storm. We should head back, Owen said reluctantly. Those clouds look serious. They rode home at a faster pace, racing the weather. The first heavy drops began to fall as they reached the barn, and by the time they'd unsaddled the horses and made a dash for the house, the rain was coming down in sheets. Safe inside, they stood dripping on the entry rug, laughing at their bedraggled state. I'll stoke the fire, Owen said. You should change before you catch cold. Upstairs, as Penelope changed into dry clothes, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her damp hair curling wildly around her face. She looked younger somehow, vibrant with happiness. For the first time in years, she felt beautiful. When she returned downstairs, Owen had the fire blazing and had changed his own wet clothes. He looked up as she entered, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. I was thinking, he said, we could be married as soon as the circuit preacher comes through. He's due in Timber Creek next week. So soon? Penelope asked, though the idea thrilled her, unless you'd prefer to wait. Uncertainty crept into his expression. No, she said quickly. Next week would be perfect. I have no family to invite, no wedding clothes prepared. Owen crossed to her, taking her hands. Sarah would help with a dress, I'm sure, and as for family. He squeezed her fingers gently. We'll make our own, you and I. The simple statement brought fresh tears to Penelope's eyes. Yes, she whispered. We will. In the days that followed, word spread quickly about their impending marriage. Sarah Callahan, true to Owen's prediction, took charge of wedding preparations with practical efficiency, enlisting help from the few other women in the area. To Penelope's surprise, even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house rode out to offer assistance and, somewhat grudgingly, congratulations. Never thought Owen Dawson would actually go through with marrying his mail-order bride, she confided to Penelope as they worked on alterations to a cream-colored dress Sarah had provided. Especially not after seeing you were. She caught herself. Well, not what folks expected. And what did folks expect, Mrs. Henderson? Penelope asked, her tone mild but firm. The older woman had the grace to look embarrassed. Someone younger, I suppose, more impressionable. Owen doesn't want impressionable, Penelope replied. He wants a partner. Mrs. Henderson considered this, her needle pausing. You know, I believe you're right. And looking at you now, I can see why he chose you. There's a steadiness about you that was missing when you first arrived. It was as close to an apology as Penelope was likely to get, and she accepted it with a nod. On the morning of the wedding, Penelope woke to find a small package outside her door. Inside was a silver hair comb inlaid with mother of pearl and a note in Owen's precise handwriting, "This belonged to my mother." She wore it on her wedding day and said it brought her 50 years of happiness. "May it bring you even more." Until this afternoon, the simple gift moved her deeply. She hadn't expected Owen to have such sentimental treasures, given his practical nature. That he would share this piece of his family with her spoke volumes about his feelings. Sarah arrived mid-morning to help Penelope prepare. The cream dress had been altered to fit perfectly, its simple lines complemented by a sash of blue ribbon that matched Penelope's eyes. Sarah arranged Penelope's hair in a sophisticated style, securing it with Owen's mother's comb. "You look beautiful," Sarah declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Not like a bride playing dress-up, but like a woman who knows her own worth." "Thank you," Penelope said, turning to embrace the woman who had become a true friend, "for everything." The ceremony was held in the parlor of the Dawson ranch house, with Reverend Thomas officiating. The guests were few: Sarah and her son Patrick, the Vasquez brothers, and a handful of neighboring ranchers with their families. To Penelope's surprise, many of the townspeople had also made the journey, including Mrs. Henderson and even Joe Wheeler, who had been so vocal in his criticism at their first meeting. Owen stood by the fireplace, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. When Penelope entered on Sarah's son's arm, standing in for the father she lacked, Owen's expression transformed from nervous anticipation to wonder. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to honor, cherish, and support one another through all of life's challenges. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was tender but held a promise that made Penelope's cheeks flush. The celebration afterward was modest by Eastern standards, but generous for the frontier: roast beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a cake that Sarah and Mrs. Henderson had collaborated on, setting aside their differences for the occasion. As the afternoon wore on, Penelope found herself standing on the porch, taking a moment of quiet amidst the festivities. Joe Wheeler approached, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, the new title still strange to Penelope's ears. "I owe you an apology. Do you?" She replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. "I spoke unkindly when you first arrived, made judgments no man has the right to make." He twisted his hat in his hands. "Owen Dawson's the best man I know, and if he chose you, then you must be exceptional indeed." "Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Apology accepted." He nodded, clearly relieved, and returned to the gathering inside. Owen found her a few minutes later, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything all right?" "More than all right," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I was just taking a moment to absorb it all, overwhelming a bit, but in the best possible way." She turned to face him. "Did you ever imagine when you wrote that advertisement that it would lead to this? Honestly, no." His smile was rueful. "I hoped for compatibility, respect, perhaps friendship in time. I never expected." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "Expected what?" she prompted. "To feel this way," he finished softly. "Like my heart's too full for my chest, like everything before you was just preparation." Penelope reached up to touch his face, marveling that this man was now her husband. "I know exactly what you mean." As evening approached, the guests began to depart, each offering congratulations and in many cases belated welcomes to Penelope. Sarah was the last to leave, hugging Penelope tightly. "You'll do well together," she whispered. "I've never seen Owen look at anyone the way he looks at you." And then they were alone, the house quiet around them, the reality of their new status settling over them like a warm blanket. "Would you like to see something?" Owen asked, taking her hand. "Of course." He led her upstairs, past her room and his, to a door at the end of the hall that had remained closed during her stay. Opening it, He revealed a room she hadn't known existed, smaller than the bedrooms but cozy, with a window seat overlooking the valley and bookshelves lining one wall. "I thought this could be your private space," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "For reading or writing letters or whatever you might want. Every person needs a place that's just their own, I believe." Penelope was touched beyond words. In her previous life, privacy had been a scarce commodity, with every corner of their dwindling household claimed by necessity. "It's perfect," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Truly perfect." Later that night, in what was now their shared bedroom, Penelope discovered that the passion Owen kept carefully contained in public found beautiful expression in private. His touch was reverent but not hesitant, and when he whispered that she was beautiful, she believed him completely. In the quiet aftermath, lying in his arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Penelope felt a peace she'd never known before. "Happy," Owen murmured against her hair. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." His arms tightened around her. "Welcome home, Penelope Dawson. Home." The word resonated within her, perfect in its simplicity. After years of uncertainty and obligation, she had found her place, not just a physical location, but the space beside this remarkable man, building a life together in this wild, beautiful land. The months that followed their wedding brought changes both expected and surprising. Penelope discovered hidden talents for gardening and cheesemaking, while her bread improved from passable to exceptional under Sarah's occasional guidance. She learned to ride as confidently as any ranch wife, to mend fences in emergencies, and to shoot well enough to protect the chicken coop from predators. Owen, for his part, proved to be a patient teacher and an attentive husband. He never dismissed her ideas or suggestions, even when her Eastern perspective missed important Western realities. Instead, he explained, demonstrated, and praised her quick learning. Their evenings were perhaps Penelope's favorite time. After the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire reading aloud to each other from Owen's extensive library, playing chess or checkers, or simply talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Owen would play the fiddle, another surprise talent, while Penelope mended or knitted. As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch prepared for winter. Hay was stored, preserves were put up, and repairs were made to ensure the house would withstand the coming snow. Penelope threw herself into these preparations, aware that her first Montana winter would test her in ways she could barely imagine. "You're working too hard," Owen observed one evening as she rubbed liniment into her aching hands. "No one expects you to master everything in a single season." "I expect it of myself," she replied. "I won't be the Eastern wife who crumbles at the first hardship." Owen took her hands in his, massaging the sore spots with gentle pressure. "You've nothing to prove, Penelope. Not to me, not to the neighbors, not even to yourself. You belong here now." "No one doubts that." His words warmed her, but she remained determined to pull her weight. When the first snowfall came in late October, earlier than usual, according to Owen, Penelope faced it with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "It's beautiful," she said, standing at the window as fat white flakes transformed the landscape. "But I can see how it could become frightening." "This is just the beginning," Owen warned. "By January, the drifts might reach the second-story windows in a bad year." Despite Owen's cautions, nothing could have prepared Penelope for the reality of a Montana winter. By December, the world had narrowed to the house and barn, connected by a pathway they laboriously kept clear after each new snowfall. The cold was like nothing she'd experienced in Boston, a living, hungry thing that sought any opening, any exposed skin. Yet, there was beauty too. Mornings when the sun turned the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Evenings by the fire, wrapped in quilts and each other's arms, listening to the wind's eerie music. The profound silence after a heavy snow, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Christmas brought unexpected joy when Sarah and Patrick Callahan arrived by sleigh, having braved the weather to spend the holiday with them. They brought gifts, hand-knitted scarves, preserves from Sarah's cellar, and a wooden chess set Patrick had carved himself. "I couldn't bear to think of your first Christmas here being just the two of you," Sarah explained as she helped Penelope prepare the feast. "I wouldn't have minded," Penelope admitted. "Every day with Owen feels like a gift." Sarah smiled knowingly. "Newlyweds." "But I remember that feeling, even after 30 years with my Henry." The Vasquez brothers joined them for Christmas dinner, bringing a traditional Mexican dish their mother had taught them and stories that had everyone laughing despite language barriers. For Penelope, who had spent the previous Christmas alone after her parents' deaths, the warm gathering felt like a miracle. January brought storms that tested even Owen's experience. For nearly 2 weeks, they were completely snowbound, unable to reach even the barn without digging through drifts taller than Owen. They took turns making the dangerous journey to care for the animals, always roped together so neither would be lost in the blinding white. During those isolated days, Penelope discovered new depths to her marriage. They talked for hours, sharing childhood memories, secret dreams, and old sorrows. Owen spoke of his father's disappointment when he abandoned the law, of the brother who had died in the war between the states, of his mother's quiet strength that had inspired his own. Penelope told him of her years caring for her increasingly bitter father and fragile mother, of dreams deferred and eventually abandoned, of the loneliness that had driven her to answer a stranger's advertisement. "I'm glad you did," Owen said, holding her close as another blizzard raged outside. "Sometimes I think you were meant to come here to find me." "Perhaps we were meant to find each other," she replied. In February, during a rare clear spell, Dr. Martin from Timber Creek made his winter rounds by sleigh. He checked on the pregnant women and chronically ill in the scattered ranches, and stopped at Dawson Ranch primarily for a hot meal and company. Over coffee, Penelope mentioned the fatigue and occasional nausea she'd been experiencing. "How long has this been going on?" The doctor asked, suddenly professional. "A few weeks." "I assumed it was just the winter confinement." Dr. Martin asked several more questions, some embarrassingly personal, before smiling broadly. "Mrs. Dawson, I believe you're expecting a child." The news stunned Penelope into silence. Owen, who had been adding wood to the fire, froze mid-motion. "A baby," he finally managed. "You're certain, Doc?" "As certain as I can be without more examination," the doctor replied. "I'd put your due date sometime in late August or early September." After the doctor left, Owen and Penelope sat beside each other on the sofa, hands clasped, still absorbing the news. "I had almost given up hope," Penelope whispered. "At my age, after what the Boston doctors said." "Are you happy about it?" Owen asked, his voice unusually tentative. She turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Happier than I can express, but what about you? We never really discussed children beyond acknowledging it might not happen." Owen's face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it took her breath away. "Penelope, having a child with you. It's more than I ever dared hope for." He knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he marveled. "Our baby." As winter gradually loosened its grip, Penelope's pregnancy progressed with relatively few complications. Dr. Martin visited when possible, and Sarah Callahan became an invaluable source of practical advice. The news spread through the scattered community, bringing visitors once the roads cleared, women bearing baby clothes and advice, men offering congratulations and promises of help with spring planting. "You've become quite popular," Owen observed after one such visit. "A far cry from your reception in town last summer." "People change their minds when given reason to," Penelope replied, "and perhaps I've changed too." It was true. The Eastern lady who had stepped off the stagecoach nearly a year ago would hardly recognize the confident ranch wife she had become. Her hands were now calloused from work, her skin tanned from the sun, her body stronger despite the changes of pregnancy. But the transformation went deeper. She had found purpose, joy, and a love she'd never imagined possible. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the fields, chicks in the coop, and the garden awakening under Penelope's careful tending. As her body expanded with their growing child, she modified her activities, but refused to be idle. The women in my mother's village worked in the fields until the day they gave birth. Tomas Vasquez told her when Owen expressed concern about her gardening. It makes for strong babies. Summer arrived with its intense heat and long, productive days. Owen hired an additional hand to help with haying, aware that Penelope couldn't contribute as she had the previous year. Her due date approached as August ripened the wheat fields and brought the first hints of autumn to the evening air. One hot afternoon, as Penelope rested in the shade of the porch, a wagon appeared on the road from town. As it drew closer, she recognized Mrs. Henderson and, surprisingly, Joe Wheeler. "We've brought some things for the baby," Mrs. Henderson announced as Owen helped her down from the wagon, "and some news you should hear." Over lemonade in the parlor, Wheeler explained that a group of Eastern investors had been buying up ranches in the territory, sometimes using questionable tactics. "They approached me about selling my place," he said grimly. "When I refused, there were accidents, a broken fence, cattle scattered, a small fire in my barn." "You think it was deliberate?" Owen asked, his expression hardening. "No, it was. Caught one of their men red-handed next time he tried." Wheeler leaned forward. "They'll be coming for you next, Owen. Your water rights alone make this place valuable." "Let them come," Owen said firmly. "This ranch isn't for sale at any price." After their visitors left, Penelope found Owen standing on the porch, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Are you worried?" she asked, joining him. "Cautious," he replied. "Wheeler's not one for exaggeration." "What will we do?" Owen put his arm around her, his hand resting protectively over their unborn child. "Be vigilant, warn Miguel and Tomas, perhaps hire another hand temporarily." He kissed her temple. "Don't worry, love. I built this place from nothing. I won't lose it now, not when I have so much more to protect." 2 days later, Penelope woke before dawn to insistent pressure in her lower back. By breakfast, there was no denying that the baby was coming nearly 3 weeks earlier than Dr. Martin had predicted. "I'll fetch Sarah," Owen said, trying to mask his panic with practicality. "She's closer than the doctor." "Hurry," Penelope gasped as another contraction gripped her. "But be careful. Remember what Wheeler said." Owen hesitated, clearly torn between leaving her and the need for help. "Go," she insisted. "Miguel's wife can stay with me until you return." The hours that followed tested Penelope's endurance beyond anything she'd experienced. Maria Vasquez, who had borne 4 children of her own, provided comfort and practical assistance, but the labor was long and difficult. By the time Owen returned with Sarah, Penelope was exhausted and frightened. "The baby's positioned awkwardly," Sarah explained after examining her. "We need to try to turn it." What followed was a blur of pain and fear, with Sarah's calm voice anchoring her to consciousness. Owen remained by her side, his face pale but determined, whispering encouragement and love. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as she fought through another contraction. "You can do this, Penelope, you and our child." Just as Penelope felt she could endure no more, the baby finally shifted, and within minutes, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that belied her early arrival. "She's perfect," Sarah announced, placing the swaddled infant in Penelope's trembling arms. "Small but strong." Penelope gazed down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair, and felt love overwhelm her, fierce and primal. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Owen sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Penelope, one finger gently stroking his daughter's cheek. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Penelope asked. Owen considered the tiny face. "What about Hope?" "Because that's what she represents, everything we hoped for but didn't dare expect." "Hope Dawson." Penelope tested the name. "It's perfect." The next weeks passed in a haze of exhaustion and joy as they adjusted to life with an infant. Hope proved to be a good baby, though she kept hours that reminded Penelope of newborn calves active precisely when her parents most needed sleep. September brought the first frost, and with it, unexpected visitors. Penelope was nursing Hope in the parlor when Owen burst through the door, his expression grim. "There are men coming up the road," he said, reaching for the rifle he kept above the fireplace. "4 of them, city clothes, riding good horses. Wheeler's investors." Penelope clutched Hope closer. "Maybe. Miguel and Tomas are in the south pasture. I've sent Patrick to fetch them." He checked the rifle's loading. "Stay inside, away from windows." "Owen, be careful," she pleaded. "Don't do anything rash." He kissed her quickly, then touched Hope's head gently. "I won't. But I won't be threatened on my own land either." From the bedroom window, Penelope watched as Owen walked out to meet the approaching riders, rifle held casually but visibly. The men stopped, and words were exchanged that she couldn't hear. One man, better dressed than the others, dismounted and approached Owen, gesturing expansively toward the ranch buildings. The conversation appeared civil but tense. Twice, Owen shook his head emphatically. The man reached into his coat, producing papers that he tried to hand to Owen, who refused to take them. Finally, the man remounted his horse, and after a few more words, the group rode away. Owen returned to the house, his face stormy but controlled. "They offered twice what this place is worth," he said, hanging the rifle back in its place. "When I refused, they hinted at unfortunate accidents that might befall an isolated ranch with a new baby." Fear gripped Penelope. A threat, clear as day though carefully worded. Owen sat heavily, running a hand through his hair. "They'll be back, or their hired men will. What can we do?" Wheeler's organizing the local ranchers, safety in numbers. He looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in Penelope's arms. "I won't risk you or our daughter, but I won't be driven from our home either." In the days that followed, the ranch operated under a state of watchful tension. The Vasquez brothers took turns keeping guard at night, and neighboring ranchers stopped by frequently, ostensibly for social calls but actually to demonstrate solidarity. A week after the investors' visit, Penelope woke in the night to the smell of smoke. Beside her, Owen was already pulling on his clothes. "Fire in the north hay field," he said grimly. "Wake the brothers, I'll check how bad it is." Heart-pounding, Penelope rushed to alert Miguel and Tomas, then returned to Hope, who was mercifully still sleeping. From the window, she could see flames in the distance and dark figures moving against the orange glow. Owen and the Vasquez brothers, working to contain the blaze. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. Hope woke hungry, and Penelope nursed her with one eye always on the window, watching for any sign that the fire was spreading toward the house. Just before dawn, Owen returned exhausted and smoke blackened. "We contained it," he reported, washing his face in the basin. "Lost about a third of the north hay field, but the rest is salvageable." "It was deliberate?" Penelope asked, though she already knew the answer, clearly. "We found where it was started multiple points of origin." His hands clenched into fists. "Wheeler found the same pattern on his place." "What now?" "Now we fight back." Owen's voice was hard with determination. "Not with violence, but with law. Wheeler's telegraphed the territorial governor and the federal marshal. There are laws against this kind of intimidation." The next morning, more neighbors arrived to help salvage what they could from the damaged field. Among them was the territorial marshal, who had been visiting a nearby town when Wheeler's message reached him. "This isn't the first case I've heard of," Marshal Collins told them as they sat around the kitchen table. "These Eastern companies have been using these tactics all through the territories, but it's the first time I've arrived quickly enough to gather fresh evidence." "Will it be enough to stop them?" Penelope asked, bouncing Hope gently in her arms. "Maybe not to convict specific individuals, but enough to scare the company backing them." The marshal sipped his coffee. "These investors don't like publicity." Once I telegraph my report to Washington, they'll likely back off rather than risk federal investigation." "And if they don't?" Owen asked. Marshal Collins' eyes hardened. "Then they'll learn why we appointed lawmen from the very territories they're trying to steal." True to the marshal's prediction, there were no further incidents at Dawson Ranch. Whether due to the federal attention or the obvious solidarity of the local ranchers, the investors seemed to have turned their attention elsewhere. As October painted the aspens gold and the evenings grew cool, life at the ranch settled back into its normal rhythms. Hope thrived, growing stronger each day, her eyes gradually changing from newborn blue to a warm brown like Penelope's. Her arrival had transformed the ranch house from a home into something sacred, a place where their love had created new life. One evening, as the first snow dusted the distant peaks, Owen and Penelope sat on the porch, Hope sleeping against her father's chest. The moment was peaceful, perfect in its simplicity. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement, coming west, marrying a stranger?" Penelope considered the question, though she already knew her answer. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "Even during the hardest times, the blizzards, the threat from those investors, the difficult birth, I've never regretted choosing this life with you." Owen shifted Hope gently to free one arm, which he wrapped around Penelope's shoulders. "When I placed that advertisement, I thought I was being practical, looking for a partner, not a romance. And now," she prompted, leaning into his embrace, "now I understand that what we have is both practical and profound." His voice softened. "You're my partner in all things, Penelope, but you're also the love I never expected to find." Penelope thought of her arrival in Timber Creek just over a year ago, the whispers, the judgment, the mockery of her age. How those small minds had nearly broken her confidence before Owen's quiet appreciation had restored it. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she asked. "That if I'd been younger when we met, I might not have been ready for this life for you. Every experience, every year that others saw as diminishing my value, was actually preparing me for where I was meant to be." Owen's arm tightened around her. "In my eyes, you're timeless, Penelope. Not young, not old, but perfectly, exactly who you're supposed to be." As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Penelope Dawson felt the truth of his words settle into her soul. Here, with this man and their child, she had found not just a home but her true self, strong, capable, and deeply loved. Not despite her age, but because of the woman those years had shaped her to become. The whispers in town had faded, replaced by respect hard-earned through her resilience during that difficult first year. The woman who had once been mocked as too old to be a proper bride was now sought out for advice, included in community decisions, and pointed to as an example of what a true partnership could be. "I love you, Owen Dawson," she said softly as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years we have." "And I love you," he replied, his voice carrying the certainty of a vow renewed, "every day in every season for as long as we have together." Hope stirred against his chest, her tiny hand reaching up to grasp his finger. Together, they watched as more stars emerged, bright against the deepening blue, timeless points of light illuminating the darkness, much like the love that had found them against all odds in this wild, beautiful land.